Welcome back to episode 8 of the Go Full Amazon podcast. I can't believe we finally made it.
Episode 8.
It's like the 7-year itch.
We passed.
We were saying before that we haven't cheated on each other yet.
It's been very good. Well, we've just had other people join us.
Does that make us unicorns?
Oh, God. Don't even start with unicorns. Those of you that don't know about unicorns, Google it. Or maybe don't.
Maybe don't. So we're going to open up. We're going to be talking about authenticity today, and we're going to open up with an intention statement.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I had done, actually in 2013, which is, I guess not really a couple of years ago, I had done a class with Brene Brown, and it was a workshop class about authenticity and vulnerability. So one of the intentions in that class, which I thought was perfect for tonight's podcast, was the following: cultivating authenticity. I am never more courageous than when I am embracing imperfections, embracing vulnerabilities, and setting boundaries with the people in my life.
I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of perfect about what we were talking about, right?
It is perfect.
So tonight, Tara and I really wanted to kind of like step back and reflect on what has happened since we started the podcast, how much fun we're having, and the things that have come up for the both of us as we've been doing this.
Yeah, and I think you and I kind of went back and forth about talking about authenticity because I think what you were saying earlier was that when we started out to do this, we really wanted to help other people.
Yeah.
And we're starting to discover that this is really helping us and something that we need in our lives every day.
Yeah, I think that's the craziest thing, that's the phenomenon that's happened. And I think I've been saying this kind of since like day one. You know, I was terrified to do this, and I was nervous about putting myself out here, and I was scared and people would hate us or no one would really like us, or why were we doing this? Like, I definitely had tons of fears, and I'm so grateful that I kind of like told them to shut the fuck up and like was able to like move forward with this, because what has come on the other side is I have gotten to know myself in a way that I needed but didn't know I needed. Does that make sense?
It does. So give me an example. Like what has really helped you? Or what have you had to like take a deep look at that you probably weren't willing to look at before?
Oh God, that's such a big question. So I think that I think it's a maturity process, but I also think of like where I am in my life. Like, I want to make sure that whatever I'm putting out there is really how I'm living, you know? So, and for the most part, none of that has really not been true, but there's definitely been some areas of my life, like possibly relationships and things where they weren't good enough to the standards that I would want to be like really kind of like talking about.
Right. Well, because we tend to be like living the Instagram life of, you know, we're all quick to write hashtag no filter, but really there's a big filter on there.
Big filter. And it allows you to do that. Social media allows us to do that. We can filter and post whatever we want. And I think the funniest one I saw this week was like, oh, look at me baking cake and cookies with my kids. God, I hashtag love them. And then all of a sudden you're like, the reality is like, oh my God, you dropped the eggs in the batter. Like, you know, I mean, that's kind of what it is for me. And I know that for me, like, I'm one of those that like, I scream at my kids on my way to church, and then we walk in the door and we're like, hi everybody.
Grateful to be here.
As I just told them to like get in the car. I'm like, get in the fucking car. You know what I mean? That's what we're getting on our way to church. You know, so and I think that I've been a little bit more aware of that. But for me, it's always comes down to like relationships, because for me, there's always a vulnerability that comes to heart stuff for me. And I know that I have been really attracted and really only open to love since my divorce to like really unavailable people, you know, which obviously has my own reflection in it, and part of some of it's my part.
Right.
So I really had to look at that, you know, about like, what is it my part that I've been okay with that? And it's not really what I want.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you think you're scared of? Or were you scared of? Or were you just putting up a wall or trying not to get hurt? Like,
I think all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely I didn't want to get hurt, you know? And I don't know if I was ready. You know, I had this great conversation with my pastor at Easter, and we talked about that, because I was, you know, I kept telling him, I'm like, well, you know, I'm kind of dating like a couple different people, and like there's like a cheese platter of people that I'm kind of like, you know, no one's really in, but they were kind of like on the surface, on the outside, and you know, I did call it my cheese platter, just because, again, and nothing was anything big, like it was no big relationships. It was more like just kind of like chatting with people and stuff, and I was like not okay with like just kind of all that chaos on the outside, when really what I wanted was, a little bit more connection.
Yeah.
Was more connection.
It almost kind of reminds me of like what you and I were talking about this morning when we were talking about how, like, when you're on your phone all the time and you're scrolling and scrolling and you've got all these things going on and you're not really focused on the moment in time. And it's almost like you were doing that with your relationships, like kind of like a little bit of dabbling and like scrolling through the cheese platter.
So what I found that, and as more women have reached out to me and more connection that I've made with the podcast and again, not because I want to present myself as someone who is like this like guru, because I'm definitely not a guru. Like there's nothing guru about me, but I wanted to show up in a different way. Like I didn't want all that noise to be happening that didn't really make me feel good.
See, I don't know that that's not true, that you're not a guru.
Why?
That's because you've lived life. You've lived life. Like, I think a guru is someone who's experienced life like at its maximum, and I think you've done that. Like, you've experienced a lot of life, death, tragedy, financial difficulties, going back and getting a new education. Yeah, you're a guru.
Oh God! If you could see my eyes rolling right now, you wouldn't even know what to see. Right, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a guru.
But when you think back and look at it, I mean, in your head, you might see some of your past as like failures, but they're not. Like I don't see our past as failures. I see it as experiences that make us who we are today and better for it.
Yeah.
If you learn from it.
Yeah, and we learn, and I think that I have. And it was funny because I'm even looking at, this class that I took on vulnerability, I was looking at it was 2013. And so, and I was probably at a place in my life that I don't even really know I can't even remember. I'm so bad with dates that I'm not really sure even what was going on then. But I know that it was a gift that one of my friends had given me for Christmas. Like, she's like, I think you need to do this class with me. I'm like, all right. So she had given it to me for a gift. And I just looked at some of the stuff in it, Tara and I just looked at it while we were eating dinner. And, it's funny because I've come really far from some of those things in there. But there's some where I'm like, oh, I still have to work on that. So I think that's part of the journey. And I think that every time we do something out of that is terrifying to us, like this podcast or, a new date or like looking at our finances when we don't really want to, or, applying for a new job, or like whatever the shit is that we have to do on a day-to-day basis, like that comes down because that's what life is. Like, that's just life. Like for me, I can't consider myself a guru because I've just responded to my life. Like, that's really what I've done. I've made the choice that when my life comes at me, because life is going to happen whether you are participating in it or not. Like, I can make two choices. You either go or you grow. I always call them like that, those go or grow moments, right?
I love that line from you.
Yeah, the go or grow moments. And like, and I've been lucky enough where even though some of them have been like knock me on my ass kind of moments, my divorce, rehab, like, I mean, my brother's death. I mean, I could like name them all,
Yeah.
I've been able to grow from every single one of them, and that's not just me. Like, that's a God thing. Like, I have a huge faith. We all know that. Like, yeah. I definitely believe that my faith has a lot to do with that,
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about authenticity, and I actually looked up the definition today because I'm a nerd like that.
You are.
So my favorite one was of undisputed origin, like genuine.
Yeah.
And I put a lot of thought into that because when we started this podcast, I was starting to feel like a general discontent with my life, and not the people in it, but just what I was doing, because I've always followed the rules.
Yeah.
Like, I've always, like, when I went to school, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this because this pays this amount of money and stuff. And what I've been feeling at my job.
You're very cerebral when it comes to like that kind of stuff, right? You're very cerebral.
I've always had a plan, like a financial plan, and this is where it's going to go. But I've never really had a passion that I have, and I've suppressed it and followed it. But, like, I think, and I talked about this with you a lot, is taking care of patients at the hospital and not feeling like I'm making a difference. Like, I literally give medications to make patients feel better and get through surgery, and to some degree that helps, but I'm not impacting their life. And the more I read and the more I listen, the more I realize that I am meant to do something more. And so, and I think the plant-based nutrition is going to play into that. I'm just not quite sure how. So I'm just kind of reading and going with it and living it and doing it.
Yeah, and I completely understand that on a visceral level. Like, I understand that, like, because I get to do that. On the flip side, I mean, of course, we work in the same hospital.
Yeah.
But my side is completely different. and I come from a corporate background where nobody gave a shit about really my job. And now I'm in a place where I get to have such personal interactions and such quality connection with my patients that like I can't believe I even survived corporate America, but I also know that I wouldn't have been able to handle my job at 20 years old if I had done it right out of college.
Because of the emotional.
Because the emotional thing, yeah. What I can bring to the table now as someone who's, experienced the things that I have in my life, who's like in her 40s, you know what I mean? Like I have such a different perspective when it comes to patient care.
Right.
And what I can handle and what I can't handle,
And we talked about this in episode 4 with Sue Benzuli and at the Evolve Apothecary.
Go ahead, honey. It's okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
Little guy. Go ahead.
So we talked about this in episode 4 with Sue Benzuli when you were talking about that. And then she said, what was the tip she gave you? She gave you some tip.
Oh, she told me, because what was happening was I was getting my energy drained from that connection, and I had been doing it. So she told me that what I needed to do was before I went into work, it was like almost like picture myself being like kind of like covered in like this golden shield where like people's energy can't suck my energy, but I'm able to give and like just to kind of protect my own energy.
And you've been doing that.
I have, and I've been feeling much better. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's been a crazy practice. I just kind of like take a few minutes before I go into work, and I just kind of like just have a little like little prayer, a little like meditation like moment where I can just kind of like take that off, or
That's
I'm sorry,
cool.
put that on. I guess put my shield on.
Put your shield on.
Put my shield on. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me what's like. So I know you and I have talked about a lot about like, just the things that have come up for us, like doing this podcast. First of all, it's been super fun. Like some of our guests have been so fun, and some of our responses have been so great. Like I didn't know how much I needed to do this until now that we do it, and now I love it.
Well, I think the other thing I like about it is the connection to people, and because I think we spend so much of our time on social media and kind of in our own shit that we don't really connect with other people. And so actually sitting down with like Dave Gee and Sue and Scott Benzuli and talking and not having like any distractions, you really get to know people and hear what they're saying, and it's kind of cool. And I didn't realize how secluded I live until I started connecting with other people.
Well, I think that's such a crazy phenomenon is that like that people forget, like this is how you're supposed to connect. Like you're supposed to look somebody in the eye and like talk to them and like shake your head when they're talking and stuff like that. So we're so stuck in a barrier because we think that text messaging or Instagram messaging or liking something on Facebook is like actual true connection, when true connection is actually like physical presence,
Yeah.
And I think that that's really screwed up, that like it takes us to be like, oh my God, you actually can sit there and talk to somebody. And I think that even Dave experienced that a little bit, and he's like, oh my God, this is so out of my comfort zone. And we're like, well, you talk to people all day long. He's like, yeah, but this is like exposing myself. And I found that too. Like this is exposing like myself. Like when we talked about my divorce and that whole episode, like I was like, it was hard to talk about that and to expose my ex-husband. And thank God that he's so supportive in all the stuff that I do, that he was like, it's okay. I'm like, yeah, but I called you like a motherfucker in the middle of the episode. He's like, it's fine. You called me that before.
But we love that big motherfucker.
We love that big thing. Yeah. So, that's the kind of stuff that like is just, I think the connection. And I think that in anything that I know about what we're supposed to do in the world is like there's supposed to always be some human connection.
And listen.
Yeah.
I don't think people listen enough. Like really, like in a conversation, sit, hear what the other person is saying, digest it. And I think that's what you and I do so well is we actually sit and we listen to each other. And so it's not hard to converse, because if you are truly a compassionate, caring person, you're going to come up with questions and intrigue and interest in what they're saying and be able to contribute. Whereas, there's some superficial conversations that you have that are not genuine and not authentic, where it's a constant battle back and forth to one up the other person's conversation.
Yeah. And I think that there's another thing that happens too, is that, and this happened to me recently, like I just, there's, and I didn't really plan on talking about this, but, like last weekend, I think I had a difficult situation with one of my sisters. And then I also had like a situation with one of my friends that it's a really long-term friend, but we just kind of had, we had coffee together, and we just kind of had like a really like authentic conversation about just the way our friendship has just kind of changed. And instead of it just being like, we'll just ignore it, we actually talked about like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, we're just at different places in our lives right now. It doesn't mean I don't love you and I don't cherish everything about you and I'm not going to like, forget you. I said, but right now I'm like, we're just in totally different areas. Like, I'm raising kids and new career, and she and her husband are like close to being retired because they just, they started their careers early, and their kids were really, I mean, her, she has a stepson and now he's like 30, and like, I mean, they're just like, they're going to travel the world, and I'm like wiping Cooper's ass. So like, and it's soccer and like,
right.
Tryouts and like, I mean, like our lives are just completely different. And, and it was a tough conversation to have, but like, I got to look at her and like, she cried and I cried and I'm like, did we just break up? And she's like, no. And it wasn't like that. It wasn't like we just broke up. It was
just
like
acknowledging it.
We acknowledged it. And like, what a beautiful way to do that instead of it being like bitchy and hard and difficult. And like, but I was able to be like, and she kept being like, did anything happen? I'm like, no. I said, nothing has changed. Nothing's happened. It's just our life. And she's like, well, she's like, and I always say like, oh, did something happen? She's like, but I know my side too. Like, I haven't been reaching out.
Yeah.
So she's like, we all have to participate in this. And so it's not just one-sided, but what a nice way to look at someone and be like, yeah, this is just where we're at right now,
Yeah. And have it be okay.
So if I talk to her like in 2 weeks, everything will be fine. But there's no pressure of like, okay, we have to like constantly try to keep this relationship going at what it used to be 10 years ago, when it's not going to be what it is 10 years ago. 10 years ago, our lives were very different,
I feel like as we progress down this path, I feel like we're becoming onions, like we're peeling down these layers of ourselves and finding things that we didn't know about ourselves.
Yeah. But then we backtrack and I have a fight with my sister and she immediately makes me feel like I'm 14 years old.
Yeah.
Like, I can be like this, I can be on this plane and this level of like, I don't know, what'd you call me? Guruism, and I'm like, I'm flying high. I'm like, everything's good. And then like, I have a 5-minute conversation with my sister and she's like freaks out on me we really don't know the reason for all of that. And I feel like I'm 14 again, making huge giant mistakes in my life. And I just stole her sweatshirt from like, that she told me I couldn't wear, and she's now going to beat me up.
Did you talk to her?
I haven't talked to her. No.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. It's hard. It's hard because, oh God, how do I even really say this? So it's hard because I feel like I can only do that with people that are safe in the response and the reaction, and I can do that really easy with people that I know that I can trust in like that information and really my heart. I guess that's really what it's like. I feel like if I go to her and I tell her what's going on, like she's incapable of validating like my feelings, and that's like a shitty place to be. And I don't think it's not because of she's a bad person or anything like that. Like, I love her to death. Like, she's just in a stuck place in her life. Like, she's just where she is. And I accept her and love her for exactly who she is. But, why would I want to put myself there? Like, why would I want to put myself in a place where it's just not like a safe place? Does that make sense?
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. It's funny that you say that because, we had a post earlier this week where we asked, how other people lead authentic lives, and I just want to like pull these up here because actually our friend Sue at the Evolved Apothecary mentioned like that whole vulnerability thing and how scary it is, and she said, every day when we open our doors we feel vulnerable. Our store is such a reflection of our values, hopes, and dreams. When our customers come in, we want them to understand and know the effort we put into selecting product and putting together our team, so we feel vulnerable and hopeful, ... And, even though she's talking about her store, I mean, I think it sounds like the same thing with you and your sister. It's like you don't want to make yourself vulnerable to her because you know what the response is going to be. And it's not going to be something that is going to make you feel good.
Yeah.
So, living an authentic life, you can do it to an extent, but then sometimes you have to know when to pull back.
When to protect yourself.
And when to protect yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny. I met with I don't know if I told you this, but I have a cousin, my cousin Becca, who I love to death. And hopefully she listens to the podcast, but she's probably one of the coolest girls I know. I think I've told you about her. And she just got back from this like meditation trip in France. Like, she went by herself after some tragedy, after a bad divorce in her own life, and it's been a year now, and she just she'd sold her house in California, so she just was in a place where she could really just kind of do whatever she wanted to do, and she went to France for a month, and for the first week she was in France, she was at a retreat where she didn't speak for an entire week. Like no talking, like no talking whatsoever. So I met her for coffee when she came back to Rhode Island for just a little while, and she and I sat out and had coffee, and we weren't super close as cousins. Like we weren't really close. We spent some time together, but that's a side of our family where there's just a lot of dysfunction. And there's 3 of us in that side of the family that have done work, like therapy and like some rehab, and like, the 3 of us have done some work, and we are like probably the healthiest of all of that side of the family. And it was so cool to sit and talk to somebody who like got it, like who understood, like, okay, so we come from this side of a family that like the level of inauthenticity is so high,
right?
Like that they live in this world that you're like, what are you even talking? Like they're just like the delusion that comes along with it, like that we all grew up with, like it just makes you sick, And it wasn't like they were bad people or anything like that, but just like the bullshit that they believed, and then the story they keep telling themselves. You're like, oh my god, am I the crazy person? So now that we're adults and we've had a little space from that, and we've all had a little bit of, we've done our own work in it. It was so cool to sit with her, and she has 2 other sisters, and she was saying kind of what I was just saying, and she was like, she's like, my sisters aren't in a place where I can go to them with the stuff that I go through or that I want to talk about, because they're incapable of of understanding my place or like where I come from, and we all want to be heard and we all want to be seen. And when you go to people that are your family and they don't do that, it's a really lonely place.
Oh, you can feel totally
it's
lost.
So lonely. It's so lonely.
I mean, I think my mom was talking about that, like when she was growing up, not that secret of not her dad not admitting that he was not her dad, and always feeling like something was wrong, and them never talking about anything uncomfortable.
Yep.
I mean, Pete will tell you firsthand, and actually my ex-husband will tell you firsthand, like we talk about everything that's uncomfortable.
Well, that's what I kind of see. I'm like, I feel like we may have swung the other way, and now I feel like I talk to my kids about everything. Like even today, like we're, my 11-year-old, like he's like obsessed right now, thinking he's going through puberty, like because he's got a little bit of scratchy voice, and he's got a little bit of like a hoarse voice. So he's like, Mom, he's like, I think I'm going through puberty. I'm like, oh, for the love of God. I'm like, honey, you're not going through puberty. And he's like, oh, no, I am. And I'm like, all right, well, let's go through the whole thing. I'm like, let me see your armpits. Like, so here we are, like, talking about, like, hair in his armpits. I'm like, do you have hair on your balls? And he's like, oh, my God, Mom.
Hey, that's better, because my mom just used to be like, pull my pants and be like, you getting any hair down there? Like, so inappropriate. But
This is driving to their dad's house tonight. They're like, we're having the full on like puberty conversation, and Cooper's in the back going. Actually, I can't repeat what Cooper said. I forgot where we're on the podcast. I'll tell you offline. It was so funny. Yeah, but anyway, so I feel like, I'm hoping that my kids, they see my messy. They see me cry. They see me freak out. They know, like, they don't know every single detail. Obviously, there's, it has to be appropriate. But like, I try so hard to be as authentic as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And like, and create a space where they always feel like heard.
I think that's a great way to be. I mean, like, I was listening to the Rich Roll podcast today, and it was with a guru, funnily, and he was talking about like living like a compassionate life and be an open, transparent life and stuff like that. And they happen to be talking about like all the school shootings that have been going on and what's going on with these kids, and how our school system, it doesn't teach kids how to love one another, or be compassionate, or reach out. Like, instead what we do is, when we see these kids or people who are suffering, or clearly, we call them psychopaths, and some of them are, but we have a lot of like mental illness and people that are struggling, and instead of reaching out, we kind of immediately say, those people are crazy and they're going to do something bad someday, and we don't do anything to help them. And then when something bad happens, we're like, oh, I totally saw that coming.
Yeah.
And I think
we should be better than that.
We need to be open with our kids. I think it's good to talk about all the stuff that is going on, and feelings and stuff like that, because I think when kids hold all that shit in, I think that's when they explode, and they don't always respond in a way that is beneficial to society.
I know. Well, my problem is that I don't watch the news, so I don't really ever know what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, on purpose. Like, I know, and I do that, and people laugh at me or whatever, but I'm like, you know what? I'm like, so I don't share that with my kids because I don't even know what's going on, and I don't talk about it with them, so they're not hearing it from me.
Yeah. Well, not even the news, but just... What are you going through at school? What
yes,
are you feeling?
I always talk about that. Yeah, we do talk about what's happening.
Talking about puberty, talking about sex, talking about all the things that are like taboo that are not comfortable to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I had to talk about sex with Lawson. Thank God I was in the middle of school. So I had, he had asked the question probably like 3 days before I actually answered it. He'd asked the question about it, and I said, "Well, let me get back to you." And then of course I had to talk to their dad. I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "You're all over that question." I'm like, "Thanks, buddy. Thanks for that." And then I talked to a couple of the other parents, like with the boys of this age, and I said, I'm like, "Have you had the talk? Like, what did you say?" And I just kind of like did a little bit of research, like recon research on the backside. And then I just kind of was like, how am I going to handle this? And then, of course, I had some anatomy books. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make this as scientific as possible. And literally, like, one night, I just brought up my anatomy book into his bed. And I said, okay, you want to know about this? And he's like, yeah, Mom, tell me all about it. And I made it so non-sexual and, like, just about the science of it and, like, the anatomy that he was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, there was no questions. Like, it wasn't about feelings. It wasn't about falling in love. Like, it just made it very, at his age, this is the anatomy and this is how it works.
Right. I mean, how many people get that lesson, too? Yeah. I think we all need that lesson.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of do it for a living now. I do it in a different way for a living now.
You professionally know where the G-spot is.
I do. How does that always... We go from authenticity to the G-spot. How does that always happen?
We're authentically devoted to sex.
Authentically a little piggy. Whole life.
So, you were talking a little bit about like some things in exposing yourself, and I have to expose myself a little bit because I had a couple things happen this past weekend. So I went and performed in not a beauty pageant, but a bikini competition with an obstacle course, and I went down with a crappy attitude. Like I didn't want to get into it.
Why did you have such a bad attitude? What was the deal with that?
I think just because like I'm not totally happy at work, and I was stressed out at home and stressed with my financial situation, and I think that was all just weighing on me and not sharing it with other people and talking about it. I was holding it all in, and I knew I couldn't afford the trip, but I had already bought plane tickets and I went. So it was all that stuff was crashing on me. But I got there, and then I actually met up with like a few nice girls, and like we had a great time, and it ended up being fun. But while I was there, I got all these compliments from people, like people I didn't even know, saying how awesome I looked and how it was good, and I hadn't even cared about it. But as soon as I got those compliments, I was like, it's like on your Instagram where you're like, ooh, so many people liked my photo, and I started getting this hopefulness that I was gonna place, high.
Yeah.
And then we get to the awards show, and there was actually another girl from Rhode Island, and they're going through like top 20, top 19, and they get to like 11 or 10, and they're like, and from Rhode Island, and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. And then they said someone else's name, and I'm like, God. And I don't know why I was so pissed. I was such a brat. I was like a Kardashian.
You were bratty, huh?
I was very angry. And
were you disappointed? Like, so what was the anger coming from? What was the story you were telling yourself in that anger?
I was telling myself that it was unfair and that it wasn't judged fairly, but the more I thought about it, I was like, all right, I didn't put my whole heart into the prep for the show. I wasn't as lean as I was for my other show. I hadn't practiced walking. I mean, I did okay, but I had to own all that stuff. Like, I really didn't give it 100%. So I had to look at myself and say, okay, I didn't give it my best. And I had to own that. And so that was part of my authenticity for the weekend. And then, we ended up checking our bank account on Saturday, and it was negative because we went out for lunch, and they were like, credit card declined. And I was like, I just got paid yesterday. Yeah. And I looked, and it was like all gone.
Oh, no.
And I just started crying like in the middle of the lunch place. Sorry, we just got interrupted by a 6-year-old who needs to go downstairs and be quiet.
Who made a ship.
With Legos. but I ended up crying. I just started losing it, and I was like, because I had to look at my failures again, because I hadn't budgeted. I bought these plane tickets, and I had no business buying these plane tickets. I had no business doing this show because we didn't have the money. Like, we just got whacked by the IRS.
Yeah.
And in the end, kind of exposing all of those failures to my husband and talking about our own failures in our marriage and stuff, it was actually ended up being a good weekend away, even though we were broke.
Yeah.
Like, we had to like borrow from all these like little like saving accounts that we had to actually make our plane trip home.
Yeah. It's okay.
But it was good because, he didn't.
Don't you feel free from that stuff though?
Yeah.
Do you feel a little, I mean,
it was
when
very
that kind of all
liberating.
happens?
And I think that was the other thing that helped. Like, we had been struggling in our marriage, and the fact that he was so accepting and being like, listen, we have to own this together.
Yeah.
Neither one of us has been great with money.
Yeah.
And we'll get out of it.
Yeah.
Like, we'll do it together. It's going to be fine. And just hearing that, it was like, okay.
Well, and when you have those, like, they're not secrets, but they are, like, technically they're like little secrets, like, and those things just eat away, at your, like, they eat away at you, and then sometimes it takes these big moments. I know my experience in my life is like the shit has to hit the fan for me to be like, oh, yeah maybe. Yeah, maybe I'll change this, I mean, maybe this will be something I'll do differently now, and sometimes it has to happen a couple times, but, those are the moments like we were talking about. Those are your grow or go moments. So now you and Pete can have like moments where you guys can now feel a little bit more connected, more on a team, more like partners that you were looking for, like the stuff that you may have been struggling with, which the stuff was separating you, can now actually bring you a little together.
Right.
So who cares if you didn't win that stupid thing?
I mean,
it sounds like you won in other areas.
Yeah. It's so cheesy.
I know. I almost threw up a little bit with that as it was coming out. I was like, this is so cheesy.
You are a winner.
The cheese factor was super high on that one.
But no, it was good. And actually just getting to see like my in-laws and stuff. So even though, I still have no money until midnight tonight, I'm actually okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was like a huge message, and some people call it the universe, but I believe in God and Jesus. And I think it was like God's way of being like, hello, like, you need to get your shit together.
Yeah. And it's really not a failure. I mean, that's the thing is that, like, none of it's a failure.
I think it's a sign. Like I have to...
Don't put labels on it.
I have to change. Mm-hmm. So, I started canceling all my stupid subscriptions to these frivolous things that I don't need in my life. And when I make purchases, I need to ask myself, like, do I need this?
Well, isn't it funny? Because I think a couple weeks before that, like, we were all going to go do something, and I had to tell you, oh, yeah, we were going to do, like, whatever, we were going to do some week, Strong Camp?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had just, like, started my new job and stuff like that, and I remember coming to you and being like, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
And I backed out of it, I got a refund, and that was really hard to do, because I want to be able to do everything.
Yeah.
It was really hard for me to come to you and be like, yeah, I really just, it's not really what I should be doing right now.
I shouldn't have been doing that either.
I know. So, but it's funny that like that happened to me just a couple weeks beforehand.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this is what you're going to do. And you were really good about giving me advice.
I just don't like to follow my own advice.
But it's funny that when you do it, then like, I did that. I set a budget. I went over all of it. I made sure. And when I saw it all on paper, I'm like, oh, I can actually make this all work. Like,
Well, because the story I tell myself is I work so freaking hard. I deserve to have this.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't.
Well, you do, but you just can't deserve everything that you know.
Not all at once.
Not all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also got me thinking, like you were talking about how you went to that thing where you didn't talk for...
Oh, yeah, the meditation, the quiet
meditation thing. It's funny. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I relate a lot of stories from those. But like this guy was talking today about how he had like so much going on, and he ended up going to like a monastery where the Buddhists were like over in Tibet.
Yes.
And he's like, you don't know how much of a distraction life is and how selfish we are until you see these people who have nothing and they're super happy. And they spend time together and they listen and they converse and they make meals out of the food that they have. And I feel like I probably need to do that. I need to pare down some like excess stuff that I don't need in my life right now in order to be authentic.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, well, you'll also think, what you have to remember too is that I think you're coming on to the other side of some unhappiness too. And I think that, when we get into an unhappy place, anybody does. Like I know for me, like when I'm not feeling good, you know, whether it's my soul or like my body or like whatever it is. Like I want to like externally fill it with things. Like I like, you know, things that feel good. Like,
Yeah.
Whatever that is. Is it spending money, or is it eating chocolate, or is it eating ice cream, or is it having sex, or, you know, or lifting too much? Like, you know, whatever it is, the stuff that we fill it up with, like we falsely think that's going to make us feel better. You know, so you're coming on the other side of like really not feeling good, and now you're starting to feel better. So that's where all this dust settles from, and like, you know, that's where we're kind of doing the work. And I feel like we're both in the same place with that.
Yeah. And I felt
like I was filling mine with like the cheese platter, the cheese platter of filling mine.
Oh, I definitely fill mine with shopping. Like that's my impulse, like fill my bucket kind of stuff. I go and spend money that I shouldn't be spending. Yeah. And then I get myself into trouble.
Yeah, I think a lot of us suffer from that because it's instant gratification.
Yeah. And then I made a goal this week. My 12-year-old son has been like, he's clearly going through puberty because he's very moody and he locks himself in the bathroom for 20 minutes at a time. And I hope to God he's showering, but I don't ask what he's doing. I don't hear a lot of water running.
Don't ask. Don't ask.
His space is never clean, so I'm like,
don't.
But I've felt very disconnected from him, and that's been making me unhappy too. Is that loss of the relationship? And so this weekend, like all that stuff kind of happening as I was flying home, I was like, I need to spend time with my kid. And so I talked to him like a couple days ago, and I was like, will you go on a date with me Friday night? And he was like, Mom, like, what do you mean? And I'm like, let's just go get dinner. Like, you don't have to like hang out with me all night, but can we just go hang out? Because his sister's away. And I'm like, we have time to hang out alone. And I feel like we need that. Yeah. And I was like, and the Warriors-Cavs game is on. Like, we can watch that and like chill out. And he's like, that sounds pretty cool. So that stuff, I realize I need to put more into that. You know, even what we're doing Saturday night, like just like hanging out with you and going out to dinner with friends and eating like good food and keeping it simple.
Yeah, simple, which is nice, and within your budget.
Yeah, within my budget.
Yes.
Which, you know.
Do you love how it's like, what's your budget for Saturday night? Do you need me to hold your money for you?
You might need to hold my money.
Okay, I will hold your money and your credit cards. I'll do that. We'll give each other budgets. That's good.
Well, thankfully my credit cards are maxed out, so
perfect. So we don't have to worry about any of that. I'm like, no, Tara, you cannot have that $40 lipstick. No, you cannot. No, you cannot have that. You cannot have another pair of sneakers.
I am a sucker for lipstick, though. If it says, like, sexy diva on it, I'm buying it.
But remember where we're going, though. We're going to a place that's a little bit more, like, not sexy diva. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we're not going to the porn store. We're going...
I could use a good dildo, though. For another day, though. I have to like, work some overtime.
See, do you love how we go from, like, you know... Yeah,
it always goes back to
the dildo. All right, so listen, you had... I know we talked about before this. You had... some profound 5 things that really. So tell me about your list. You have a list.
Of course I have a list
because that's Tara what I always has a list.
You know, of how to live authentically. So number 1 is stop comparing yourself to others.
Yes, Brene Brown is my favorite. She has got the best quote that says, "Comparison is the thief of joy."
Yeah, and I'm still working on that. Yeah, you know, like I think you and I think people tend to be. And I've heard this before about us, that we come off as intimidating, and God, I really hope as people get to know us that changes, because we're going through the same shit that
stuff.
All you people are. Like, we constantly look at other people. There's always going to be someone better. There's always going to be someone prettier, stronger, smarter, you know, younger, whatever. And we compare ourselves to those
I'm much
people.
better at it, I have to tell you. I've gotten much better at that.
I mean, sometimes I'll admit it. I compare myself to you sometimes. Like, sometimes when we're at Manic and you're like kicking my ass, I'm like, man, I wish I could go as fast as Jen. And then I'm like, all right, like, where was I a year ago? A year ago, I couldn't do half this.
Just remind you that I'm not counting right, so that's fine. You just be like, she's not counting right anyway. She's either doing way too many reps or not enough. So,
but you're a different person, and I have to accept that my body is going to do certain things. Yeah, and your body does certain things. Yeah, the same thing
happens with you. I mean, like, you know, sometimes you lift stuff, and I'm like, holy shit. You know, I mean, I think we do the same thing.
But we're both amazing.
Yeah. And I look at it like, I'm like, oh, good. I can learn from her. Like, I try to take it that way. Yeah. You know, and not do the comparison part. I try really hard because I know that just doesn't do any good for anybody. Yeah. All right. What's the next one?
All right. Number 2.
Write these down, folks. These are profound.
Profound. I'm the guru, life coach guru.
You are.
How to live your best life. Faith. And I think this is so important because for a long time, I deviated from it. And actually, I want to tell a quick story. So after my divorce, and I was working in the pediatric intensive care unit. And so, there's a lot of sick kids and a lot of them get better for the most part, but there's a lot of death. There's a lot of terminal illnesses and diseases, and, watching kids go through that and pass away and see how, parents, it weighs on you. And I remember thinking there can't be a God that lets this happen. And I remember my mom always trying to get me to come back to church. And she was like, well, God gave us free will, and, that's not his doing. That's humanity doing it to each other. And that's just the way the world works. And he didn't promise us salvation on this earth. He's promised us salvation in heaven. And not to get all religious with you guys, but this is just what my family has told me. And I remember I was up in Maine on my parents' back porch, and I was just feeling heavy and bad for myself because I was divorced, and I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? How am I going to get through this?
Yeah.
How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to get through school? How am I going to do all this? And I remember Shauna, my daughter, came out, and she had to be 4 or 5. And I remember she came over and she held my hand and she said, you need to go back to church. I think you would feel better. That shit is profound.
Yeah.
The fact that my 4-year-old was
toddler.
able to recognize that I was not coping with life very well and tell me to go back to church. And I went back and I haven't stopped going. And I find that, you don't have to be religious, but you have to have faith in something, and believe in something
greater than yourself, something energetic,
right.
Whatever you believe, something bigger than yourself.
Right. Because if you think you are the biggest thing, you're just not going to live a good life.
That's ego. You're just centered in ego. Yeah.
So having faith, I think, is really important.
I totally love that.
And I find that it keeps me grounded. It's like a reset button. Every Sunday, when we go, there's a new message, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, I need to do better.
Yeah.
And when you need that reminder every week.
And I think being okay to talk about it. I think that, there's a lot of times where I kind of was not ashamed of my faith, or wait, you just didn't really kind of talk about it. But now I have no problem. I have no shame in knowing that it's really important to me. And I don't mind sharing it. I'll send text messages be hey, this is a message today for people that are probably pretend we don't really care. But I'm I don't care. You need to hear this message.
You're getting my message.
Yeah, you're getting my message, It's not really my message, but, and I'm because I just think that I think it's a cool, for me, I get so filled up by it. So I have no shame in it whatsoever.
Yep. So faith. Number 3, communication.
Oof.
Which I think we talked about is that's the whole reason we started this podcast, was to reach people and get that connection and listen and talk and hear what other people are going through.
Yep.
I mean, we discover that every time we have coffee is we're not the only ones struggling.
That's how we started this, yeah.
We're all on the struggle bus.
We're all figuring it out. We're all in the grunt years trying to figure it all out.
Just getting off at different stops and getting back on.
Yeah. Yep. And always. Oh, God. Yeah, I love that.
Have you ever been on a Greyhound bus, by the way?
Yes, I have.
Is that not like the struggle bus?
It's so awful.
You get on there and you're kind of these people are going through some shit. I need to get off.
Yeah, and I've been on them a few times. I mean, well, a couple times I went when we went skiing, and that was not that bad. But then, when I was in school in Vermont, I went to high school in Vermont for boarding school, and that's how I would get home sometimes from school. Yeah. I would get home from school, or I would go to school on this Peter Pan bus through Vermont. Special. I was thinking my mom, Mom, you just threw me on a bus, and she's like, yeah, you're fine.
Sent me.
Yeah. She's like, you had a granola bar. You were okay.
Your snacks.
My Sony Walkman.
Number 4, transparency, which is probably the same, on the same vibe as communicating, but being transparent, like you said with your friend, sometimes you have to have that difficult conversation, even though
I still get
just
so you know, I still get a physical response of when I hear words like transparency, or I hear vulnerability. There still is I have a physical response of fear sometimes, that I hear those words and I automatically want to just go
yeah.
I still have a barrier. I still really struggle with making sure that I am. I just struggle with that sometimes. It still scares me.
It always amazes me when you say that,
I
though, because
know. Isn't it funny? But I do. I have this physical like.
Because you're so, you come off as so confident, like you've conquered the world, and not in a cocky
that's
way,
totally
but
different,
just
though.
But
this is more intimate. This is when we talk about when I hear the words of like transparency and vulnerability.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of more of intimate relationships,
yeah.
not necessarily sexual relationships, but more like. People that I really let in.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I can talk to anybody and I can you shoot the shit and I can handle any conversation with really anybody. But I'm talking about
Oh, I totally get it.
Down deep in the dirt, vulnerability stuff.
I get it, because even though we're talking about, vulnerable stuff on this podcast, there's a lot of shit that I'm not going to tell you people.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because for sure, it would change how people looked at me. Yeah. I've done some pretty heinous shit in my life that, would I like to be transparent about it? Yep. But
we'll kill a filter on that.
But I also, that goes to protecting myself, because not everyone's, you can't, maybe you can't be genuine with everybody. Yeah. I mean, a lot of shit about me and you've accepted me. Yeah. So I've got that. And
I think that you always have to choose your audience, though. Like I said, even with my sister and my cousin, and we were talking about I think that there's people that may be too transparent and they say too much, and that's called floodlighting, and they think that creates intimacy, and it's really false.
Right.
Like people that are oversharers, or people that look at you and go and they want to tell you all of their stuff, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't want to know that. That becomes more of a burden, and then you feel actually more uncomfortable. So I think that you always have to find. I know what for me, I have to find the people that I feel safe with. That.
Yeah.
And that's kind of more what I'm talking about.
It's almost like transparency with a condom.
Yes. Transparency with a condom. Where you feel nice and safe. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you do, because you need to, I think it's, to be authentic, you have to find someone. I think someone mentioned this on our Instagram as well. Being vulnerable and being transparent is really, really hard, but it's very liberating when you find your people that you can be genuine with.
Yes.
So, I think you and I have a pretty good vibe going on where we can say a lot of stuff to each other, and we will do our best to be vulnerable and transparent on the podcast. But, clearly there's going to be things that we don't tell you people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And what's the last one?
Last one is accountability.
Oh,
take ownership for your crap.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to.
Because I think that in turn creates that circle of being transparent, is owning when you've wronged someone, owning when you've made a mistake. Don't tell yourself the story.
Well, and everybody has a part. That's why I always feel and even my kids, I am probably, my kids, I probably drive them crazy, because whenever something goes on in their life, whatever, they come home from school with some situation, or even between the two of them, or whatever it is, I do everything possible to always be well, what's your part?
Yeah.
What's your part? No matter what somebody does, or no matter what happens, you always have a part.
And how could you handle it differently? That's a great question, because I think we live in a world of finger pointing right now, where nobody wants to say, I played a part in this. Yeah. And we have so much, destruction and stuff. And I know you don't tune into the news, but in the general world, even at schools and stuff like that, when kids do something wrong at school, nobody wants to say, oh, I played a part in raising them and how their behavior. And, everyone plays a part.
Everyone does. And and so I really, really always say that to them, because, I don't want it ever to be and even sometimes Cooper will he'll get frustrated with something and he'll be like, oh, it's your fault. And I'm always like, hey, this is not on me. And I just don't take responsibility for that kind of stuff. But for the kids, I really, teaching them to look at themselves. Yeah. And their parts in situations is just really, even if it's minuscule. I'm maybe you could have handled it differently. I'm how could you, and I always say, how could you have done it differently next time? Those are the conversations I have, and I never ever blame anybody else. I'm I don't really care what the other person did. I don't.
Yeah. What did you learn from this, and how could you have done it differently?
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I always come from with them.
I think a lot of us need to ask ourselves that question.
Because I have to ask myself that question when I'm doing the stuff with them too. Yeah. When I'm flying off the handle, oh God, what's my part? How could I have handled it differently? God, I do that a lot. I like those top fives, Tara. Those are good ones.
That's what I do.
Yeah, those are good ones. So if anybody has not, listened to Brene Brown, looked at Brene Brown, done any work with Brene Brown, if you do anything, look at her TED Talk. She has a TED Talk on vulnerability that everybody needs to listen to. It's so good, and she's awesome. Like, she's awesome. She's from Texas. She's got this really cool accent, and I followed her for a long time. So she's just, I love that we got to talk about this. We had some feedback with some of our Survey Monkeys about the podcast, and people said that we needed to be more vulnerable, and like let people get to know us a little bit better. So we tried to do that tonight, but we also we're so grateful, right?
Yes.
For this opportunity.
Yeah. So for you people that are listening to us, this is so much fun. Like,
it is so fun.
I love it. It's actually like a therapy session for us.
It is. It is.
So thanks for curing us.
Thank you for going
or treating us
or into our world. Yeah. So we have, like we always do, we do have a quote for the end of the night. We appreciate everything that we're doing right now, and so one of my favorite quotes is from Terry St. Cloud. And so from the Gifts of Imperfections, she wrote the prelude to that book, which is a Brene Brown book, which is called Gifts of Imperfections. She could never go back and make some of the details pretty. All she could do was move forward and make the whole beautiful.
Love that.
I know. All right. Thank you.
Bye.